What's up, y'all? Hello, my bookish friends. Welcome back. I am Elizabeth. This is Reading Wryly, and it's wrap-up time. Kind of a unique wrap-up in that one, I actually have a DNF that I want to talk to you about. Two, I have a nonfiction in here that I want to talk to you about, so that's going to kind of defy my typical order. As usual, you know, I'm going to tell you about them from my least favorite up to my most favorite of the month, but these two are kind of exceptions. We're going to do those first. A few of these I've already talked about several times in other videos this month, so I'm going to do my best, my very best, to try to get through those ones a little bit more quickly. That's not my strong suit, so forgive me if I go on too long about them. Also, I will separate this down below into chapters so it will be easier to navigate through. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you like this. Also, I'm going to put up my other social medias here. Feel free to check me out on those as well. And with all of that being said, let's go ahead and get into the books. First, I want to talk to you about the book that I DNF'd this month. And if you've been following me for a while, you know I'm really bad at DNFing. So really this was a huge act of self-care on my part. But this is not a solid DNF. I could go back to this, I just was not feeling it. And so I put it down, I allowed myself to move along. And that is The Ferryman by Justin Cronin. Unfortunately, this was on one of my most anticipated books list. And so when I picked it up, I was really excited. This is a classic dystopian trope. And I've never read by this author before, but it just sounded like I was going to love it. And I very well may if I finish it, but it was dragging on and on. We have different classes of people, which is typical in a dystopian, living on this island called Prospera. And all of the best people live on Prospera. And then there's the next level, which is like the people that serve them. They can come onto the island to work, but they must leave and go to their own island afterwards. And we're following Proctor Bennett, who is a ferryman. Everyone lives perfect lives. And their health is measured by this monitor that they have on them at all times, or that they're supposed to have on them at all times. Nobody has children, but you can foster a new person and they come into this world as a teenager. There's so many little bits to explain. Proctor's job is to cross people over into retirement. Now, people retire when their health monitor gets below 10% or something like that. They take them to this island to retire. Their time on Prospera is done at that point. Another thing about being in this breed of people is that you don't dream, and Proctor is having dreams. In fact, he's been having dreams his entire life, and he has not told anybody because that would make him different. That would make him stand out. He ends up going off on this to this other island and explores this whole new world. Also, his monitor is depreciating very quickly, so I believe there is some kind of political element in this as well. His wife is very high up in, she's the daughter of the governor or the designer or somebody special. Anyway, there was a lot of world building happening, which I don't mind, but also it was too slow for me. It started going off on these tangents all over. As you can tell, I'm even having trouble just describing it of what's going on, and it was not captivating enough. I feel like it was building to something. I think I got 30 or 40% into this, but it just did not get there fast enough for me to the point where I was not having a good time. And I feel like it's going to go in that typical dystopian kind of curve, if you will, or format, which I would probably enjoy, but I just was not having that much fun with it. So I put it down. And let me know if y'all have read this, if it gets better. Let me know if I should pick it back up. But it's not something that I'm 100% DNFing. It's not a hard DNF, it's a soft DNF at this point. The next book that I want to talk about is a 5-star nonfiction. And you know what? The more I think about this, the more I'm maybe it wasn't quite a 5-star for me. But I did give 5 stars on Goodreads because I think when this gets to the person that needs to read it, it's going to be very much worth it, and I want to support this author in this. This is called What's Eating Us by Cole Kasdan, and it's about women, food, and the epidemic of body anxiety, which I completely relate to. I think a lot of us do. I'm weird about nonfiction. If it's not 5 stars, I won't rate it because I don't want to dissuade people from checking it out if it's something they need to learn about, because it's nonfiction. So this kind of is in its own category for me for this wrap up, but I do want to talk about it because I thought it was very interesting. It was less about how to deal with food-related body anxiety and more of kind of an anecdotal trauma bonding experience with the author. It's almost like a memoir in that way. Like Cole is telling us about her story and what she learned along the way and everything that she went through. Now, she, in her case specifically, and if this is triggering to anyone, just move on to the next chapter, because I know this is very hard for some people to hear about, talk about, etc. And I totally get it. Her struggles have been with restricting, anorexia, bulimia, and the like. Now, she does go on to talk about like binge eating disorder and all eating disorders as well, but because her specific story is about anorexia and bulimia and restrictive behaviors, I do think this story would be more meaningful to somebody who has been through that. For me personally, my relationship with food, I tend to binge and I've never restricted. So personally, actually, this gave me some ideas that were probably not healthy, things that I've never thought of before because I don't typically restrict. So it's just a really fine line as to whether or not you want to go into this. But I will say it's very inclusive. Aside from, you know, her anecdotal specific story, it is very inclusive. She talks about white privilege in here. She talks about the disparity between access to help for white people versus brown and black people, which I really appreciated. She gives us a lot of really hard to swallow statistics. Women of color are far more likely to have eating disorders, but also at the same time, they're far less likely to get any kind of treatment for those. And so just some of these are just really astounding statistics that we should know about, that should be talked about. And so I really appreciate what she was doing with this, and I felt like I gained a friend along the way. Like, I really respect her for her vulnerability and putting her story out there and admitting that, you know, she's still working on it. You know, there is no toxic positivity in here. It's just it's very much reality of like, this is what I'm going through, and more people can relate to this than we know because we don't talk about these things. So I really did appreciate it. And even though I didn't relate to it like I think other people might, I think it's a very strong piece of nonfiction, and I think it deserves recognition, which is why I gave it 5 stars. So that being said, let's go ahead and move on to my lowest rated book of this month, unfortunately, and I hate to say it. This book I gave 2.5 stars, and that is solely based on my experience. I do think other people will enjoy this one. The themes of it were not what I typically like to read about, and so I kind of feel bad about giving it this rating, but also at the same time I want to be true to myself and my experience. And so I gave it 2.5 stars, and that is The Nightmare Man by J.H. Markert. This story is about Ben Bookman. He is an author. He writes horror. He's also the heir to this old estate called Blackwood Manor, I think it's called, that's been in his family for centuries. He goes there one night, and in a frenzy, he like doesn't remember anything. He comes out the next day and he's written a full-length horror book. We don't know through most of this like what's going on with that, like how is that even possible, but he writes this horror book and it's just now being released. So we're following him as that's released. We're also following a detective character and his daughter, Detective Mills and his daughter Blue. They are investigating a case where this family has been found in this barn wrapped up in corn husks and hanging. It's very gruesome, and that's what attracted me to this. And come to find out when Ben's book is released that this crime is mirroring the things that take place in this book about the scarecrow. We go through as this unfolds following both of these different characters, and there are moments where you're like, maybe it's actually not supernatural, but it becomes kind of undeniable that there is some kind of unspoken whimsy in here. And I think that's what I did not enjoy about this, that kind of whimsy thing. Now, I do think this would be really cool if it was adapted into like a miniseries or a movie. I think this would actually serve this story better to be in a visual medium because of things that happen in this. I can completely see M. Night Shyamalan directing this. Think like The Village, but like not at all like The Village, but that kind of vibe, that kind of tone. It felt like some kind of mashup between crime thriller and like Dracula or some kind of other unspecified paranormal lore type thing. Don't get me wrong, there are no vampires in this, but it just had that air about it, that quality to it that likens it to like folklore or folktale or like old horror stories, which I think was on purpose. The atmosphere in here was great. Swarms of moths, scarecrows, stolen dreams, things of that nature. It was a little bit long-winded at time, a la Stephen King. If you like those type of Stephen King stories, I think you would enjoy this. But like I said, for me, it was just a little bit too hard for me to suspend my disbelief, especially with there being like the detective crime thriller aspect of it. It just didn't mash up the way I wanted it to, and I was ready for it to be done before it was over. So I didn't love this one, but I do think other people will. All right, next we're gonna move on to my 3-star books. The first one I wanna talk about is Truth Be Told by Kia Abdullah. This was my 3rd book by this author that I've read, and I didn't like it as much as the other 2. This is the 2nd book in the Zara Khalil series. They're all courtroom thrillers. I know that's a very specific taste that some people like and some people don't. Kia Abdullah has a way of taking social issues and talking about them within the context of a thriller, and she does a really great job of throwing twists in there. And she also is Muslim, and so she brings that representation to her stories, which I really appreciate and I think there should be more of. This one though, I will say we're following Cameron, and he's like very much privileged. He's a privileged Muslim boy, him and his brother. They go to this like prep school, and there's definitely talk about how they're different from the other kids that go to this school because it's mostly white kids. And he is very responsible. You know, he's got Oxford lined up for next year. I think it's his senior year, and he's just, everything's going perfectly in his life because he's had every opportunity to do so. And then he goes to a party one night, drinks a little bit more than he should have, and he wakes up in bed next to a man. So this is a case where he feels like he was violated. He's not gay, and there's a lot of really intense moments there where she has this discussion about the implications of, first of all, a man being sexually assaulted. So many people would say, you know, maybe that's not possible. Kind of along the lines of Any Man by Amber Tamlin. Like those conversations are being had in here. And then also the implications of like people thinking he's gay and him saying he's not. Is he actually gay and he's afraid to admit it because he comes from this kind of religious, conservative background? Or is he actually not gay? And then also, what actually happened that night? There are a lot of social issues that I love that she brings into this, although I do think this one was good. I don't think it's as good as the other 2 that I've read from her, and not as twisty. I absolutely saw the twist coming in this one towards the end, so it became a little bit less satisfying, but nonetheless, I would still recommend this. I still enjoyed following Zara Khalil, who ends up being his counselor, and she is not his lawyer, but she kind of walks him through every step of the way. You know, we're following her own problems and her own issues with her family as a Muslim American and as a woman, the kind of grief and pushback that she gets for even, you know, representing the people that she represents. So I think Kia Abdullah is great. I would definitely recommend this, but first of all, I would recommend her other 2 books before this one. Obviously the first, Zara Khalil, because that is the first in the series. Take It Back is the first Zara Khalil. Next of Kin. I think Next of Kin is still my favorite. It was the first one that I read though, so I have a little bit of a bias towards that. Let's move on. The next book I want to talk about, I did talk about in my most recent vlog and a little bit in my last video, so I'm going to go quickly through this. It is The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz. Love that this is set in a snowy, isolated setting. This is a thriller, and it's about this group of women who go on this writing retreat with this famous horror author at her estate. I want to say home, but no, it's like an estate. They're supposed to write a full story in the month of February, in 1 month, and whoever writes the best story, the famous author, is going to give them a shit ton of money, publish their works, all of this. So it's competition, and then one of the girls goes missing and shit hits the fan. This one is very edgy. This one has a lot of like erotic type moments in here, which I thought was brave. The writing in here was really brave. It's definitely out there. It's over the top. If you don't like an over the top thriller, do not read this one. But if you liked like The Maidens by Alex Michaelides, maybe like The Guest List by Lucy Foley, where it's kind of like, oh, would this ever really happen? Probably not, but it's exciting. It's exciting. So I would recommend this one for fans of those and people who generally like isolated snowy settings. This does have LGBTQ plus rep and also just very edgy and full of drama. My next 3.5 star read for this month was actually my book club pick. If you are not aware, I have a book club. It's called the Midnight Society Book Club. I always have the link for that stuff down below. It's a free book club. Once a month, we do a live show. We all come together, we talk about the book. It's online, so if you want to join, feel free to join. All you have to do is read the book with us, hang out at the live show, talk about it. That's pretty much it. I have a separate Instagram page for that will be linked down below. Anyway, we read The Haunting of Alejandra, and I did end up giving this one 3.5 stars. I will also link the live discussion down below and above in case you want to check that out. There is a non-spoiler section if you haven't read it yet. First of all, one of the most gorgeous covers I've ever seen in my life. Like, this is so beautiful. I really am so glad that we picked this one because it was really good for a discussion. And I thought our discussion about this was perfection. Like, we touched on so many different things. I guess I should tell you what it's about. We're following Alejandra. She is a stay-at-home mom. She has 3 children. She is of Mexican descent, but she was raised by adoptive parents who were white evangelicals who did not teach her about her culture, who did not give her room to really explore who she was. And now she is in this marriage where her husband is just not cool. He's not a cool guy. He doesn't really know her. She doesn't really know her. She's unhappy. She is contemplating suicide very often. And this is focusing on a Mexican folklore demon called La Llorona. That was a whole nother aspect of this that was fun to investigate, research, and kind of figure out, like, lean into this culture. But also, Alejandra decides that she's going to see a therapist because she's just having a really hard time. So many triggers with this one, by the way. Miscarriage is one, suicidal thoughts, gaslighting, suicide in general, self-harm, just like it goes on and on. Look up the trigger warnings because it is very triggering. This did trigger me, but it also felt really beautiful in a way. She goes to see this therapist and she starts to want to discover about her heritage, her ancestry, and the women that came before her. She is being haunted by La Llorona throughout this, and we're kind of, okay, here's the thing that I love about this is that I love about horror in general, when they take something like generational trauma, like depression, and make it into, personify it into this tangible being, and in this case, it's La Llorona. Throughout this, we're kind of untangling what that means, and how this creature, this being represents that generational trauma and that depression that she is dealing with. So it is heavy. It's very heavy. I do wish that we get perspectives from her ancestors throughout this, and I kind of felt like I was expected to care about these other characters, and I really didn't. What I wish she would have done, I wish she would have maybe added some mixed media in here, and instead of those other points of views, maybe have Kathy like digging up documents that she finds about her ancestry and find it out that way. But other than that, I feel like this was so worth the read, and it was so great to discuss in book club. Very heavy topics in here, so just know that going into it, but also really beautiful. And if you stick it out towards the end and you see Alejandra's transformation, it's like a gorgeous thing to behold, and it really does bring that sense of like healing, which is just lovely. So yeah, 3.5 stars. My next 3.5 star book is The Soulmate by Sally Hepworth. This was my first time reading this author, and I had a good time with it. It was a 3.5 star thriller. We're following Pippa and Gabe. They finally, move out to this remote area, and they're kind of living their dream suburban life. Even though they're not in the suburbs, they have, this whole book has that kind of like suburbia gone wrong vibe to it. They have 2 little girls, I believe. They got this house right on this cliff right off the ocean. It's gorgeous. They're just living their best lives. They're trying to start over. And they think this is going to be the best place for them to do that. But they find out that this cliff is a cliff where people regularly go to take their own lives and jump off the cliff. So again, suicide trigger warning. Gabe gets in the habit of when he sees somebody going out there, he goes out and he talks them off the ledge. He's done it like 7 times. He's talked people off the ledge and he's kind of become like a local hero for that. Well, then one day this lady comes out there and she's about ready to jump. Gabe goes down to help her out, and she jumps. Pippa later comes to find out that Gabe knew this woman, and so she's wondering what actually happened down there, what was said, what's going on. I liked the writing style for not having read from this author before. I thought it was twisty. It was definitely fast-paced. I read this one super quickly, and the twists were good. The pacing was good. I think it's an above-average thriller, but it's not one that I'm going to remember forever. It's not one that even now sticks with me, although I do remember some of the twists. It's just not going to stay with me for that long, but if you want a quick, fun, like beach read, I think this would be perfect for that. Okay, now we're moving on to my 4-star reads for the month of May, and the first one I want to talk about is Finders Keepers. This is by Stephen King. This is the 2nd book in the Bill Hodges trilogy. The first one was Mr. Mercedes. I really liked that one. This one, it was not what I was expecting, honestly. There's like a whole separate side story that actually is most of this book. So it really does feel like its own thing, but we also have the same characters from the first book. So I don't think, I mean, there are definitely spoilers from the first book, but I can tell you enough about the story that it's not going to spoil Mr. Mercedes. At the end of the first book, we have this kind of unlikely friendship, including Bill Hodges and like his crew of unlikely friends, you know, and that's kind of the feel-good aspect of these stories, is that you root for all of these characters. They're so different, yet they fit together so perfectly. And Bill Hodges is this detective, retired detective, who is still taking on these cases and, you know, trying to figure out who he is, trying to get his life back after retirement. In this one, we're mainly following this separate story about this author who was kind of a recluse, lived in this cabin, didn't believe in banks, and so he had this stash of money and also this stash of writings. He was like this famous author. These burglars come in, kill him, steal his money, steal his journals. Well, this guy, the main guy, ends up hiding this stuff, but then he goes to prison. And so he's in prison for 35 years, and this trunk of riches is just there. So one day this kid, Pete, stumbles across it in his neighborhood, and he uses that money to help his family, who's been going through something really tough. When the guy who originally put the trunk there gets out of prison, he is on the hunt for Pete. I still really liked this one, not as much as the first one, but I really had a good time with it. I love the characters that we're following, and I'm excited to get to the 3rd book in this too and see where he takes it, because as far as series that I've read, this was definitely a different progression than what I'm used to. So I'm very intrigued to see where he takes this with book number 3. Okay, and these next 2 I have already told you about in other videos, but I'm going to go over them again because I really loved these ones as well. The first one is Who is Maud Dixon? And this is by Alexandra Andrews. Again, this is one that I can't talk much about because spoileries. It's like The Last House on Needless Street, where if you tell somebody really what's going on, it's kind of going to ruin the book for you. So don't read beyond the first paragraph of the description, but essentially we're following, what is her name? Florence. We're following Florence Darrow, and she is an interesting character. This book is told in parts, and each part is very different. It's an evolution. Florence is a writer, and she's down on her luck. She feels like she's always been meant for something special, but like she's just struggling. And she's got this really annoying mom who's always like, I gave up so much for you. Why are you not famous? Yada yada. She's very insecure. We get these thoughts in her head. She's very morally gray. She gets this job working for Maud Dixon, which could be the catalyst to her career. And the thing is though, Maud Dixon, like nobody knows who Maud Dixon is. It's a pseudonym. And so she really can't be like, hey, I'm working for Maud Dixon, because she's got to sign, you know, a non-disclosure agreement saying she's not going to tell anyone who Maud Dixon is. But she figures, you know what, I'm going to just go for it. And, you know, this could, at the very least, I could learn so much from her. So she meets Maud Dixon, and the story goes from there. Yeah, I really don't want to tell you more than that. But I will say this ends up in Morocco, and as the evolution of the story unfolds, it gets weirder and weirder. There's so much tension in here if you like feeling anxiety for your characters, because Florence is an underdog. She's not like, she's not the best person. Like, you know, she's not a good person, but she's also the underdog. So you're like kind of rooting for her. She just keeps making these terrible decisions and you're like, how are you going to get out of this? How are you going to get yourself out of this? So it's stressful reading, but it's intense and it's a good time. And I really ended up enjoying this more than I thought I was going to. So I would definitely recommend this if you have not read this yet. And now we have my favorite book of the month of May, and that is The Last Word by Taylor Adams. I had such a good time with this. It's a survival thriller. It is fast-paced. It's got a book within a book. It's got humor. We're following this woman, Emma, and she is dealing with some trauma. And so she ends up on the Washington coast house sitting for this lady that she's never met. She just wants time by herself to sit and read and kind of process all of the things that she's going through in her life. Well, she reads this horror book and it's terrible. It's awful. And she gives it 1 star. And then the author responds to her review. They go back and forth in this kind of tit for tat. And she believes this author is now stalking her. And she's all alone in isolation. So it's very much like a survival thriller. It all takes place within like a night or two. She's got this awesome dog with her. The dog POV, it's not really a dog POV, but it's like how you would talk to your dogs, like how I talk to my dogs. Like they come up and they have a certain look on their face and I know what they're thinking. And so I'll be like, oh, hi mama, or whatever. And so like we get that from the dog and you just end up falling for the dog, like head over heels. There's so much humor in this. I thought it was hilarious. The villain is just despicable, just absolutely despicable. And you hate him so much and you just root for Emma so hard. I really related to Emma. I thought this was super fast paced. I thought it was funny and it has all of those little elements that I love. I think it was so clever on Taylor Adams's part to write a novel about an author who wants revenge for a 1-star review. What better way to get good press? Because who's gonna give it a 1 star? Like after that, I'd be scared. It's like this like veiled threat, even though it's not, but I just think it's hilarious. And it's so perfect for like people like me, people like us who like to read and review books, because there's a very special space for book reviewers and we review books for the readers. Like Gabby was saying in her live show for this one, which I didn't catch live, but I watched the rerun. When that space is penetrated, for lack of a better word, by an author, it's just awkward. It's awkward. And so this is taking that tension and magnifying it by like 100 times. And it's clever, it's witty, it's funny, it's terrifying. It's all the things that I would want. And so I was just really, really happy with this one. 4.5 stars, definitely recommend it. And that's pretty much it for the books that I read in May. I am currently reading another book. I may finish it before the end of May. What day is today? Today's the 29th, so I probably will. But I'll just add that into my next wrap up for you. But I will tell you, I'm currently reading, what is it called? It's one of the Bridgerton books. First of all, after the haunting of the weight of the Haunting of Alejandra and like the heaviness of that, I needed something light. And also I'm obsessed with the Bridgerton series in general on Netflix. I haven't read any of the books, but I needed to know what the hell happens between Colin and Penelope. And I think I skipped over one that the series didn't even get to yet, but I just skipped right to Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, which is Colin and Penelope's story, and I'm loving it. I am really loving Julia Quinn's writing style. Anyway, we'll save that for next time because I'm not finished yet. Don't forget to like this video if you liked it, hit that subscribe button, and I will see you all soon. Life is short. Very important not to forget this. Life is short. So what do we do when life is short? What do? We read Wryly. Cheers. Goodbye.